And one of the interesting things you start with in the book is to talk about the United States as a supergroup. Explain what that means.
Okay, so I think this is actually really interesting and important. You know, we obviously have so many problems right now in our society, but here is something that is extremely unique about the United States. Alone among the major powers, you know, and I will defend that. That is different from France, different from England. We are what I call a supergroup. And to be a supergroup, you need to satisfy two simple conditions. First, a supergroup has to have a very strong, overarching collective identity. The second condition is a supergroup has to allow all of its subgroup identities to flourish, to not suppress them. And this is a country where, at our best, you can be Irish American, Japanese American, Croatian American, Libyan American, and yet intensely patriotic at the same time. And it's very rare. So if you take China, China's hugely powerful, not a supergroup. Why? It satisfies the first condition. It's got a really strong national identity, you know, 95% Han Chinese, but it does not allow these subgroup identities like Tibetans or Uyghurs or the minorities to flourish. And if you look at a country like France that is very similar to us, it's a Western democracy, it's actually not a supergroup by my definition for the same reason as China. It's got a very strong overarching national identity, but because of this French concept of laïcité, minorities aren't allowed to wear headscarves. They had the burkini ban. If you remember, people weren't allowed to wear the full-body swimsuit. And Sarkozy said, you know, in this country, you have to speak like a French person, eat like a French person, talk like a French person to be French. So a lot of people think that this not allowing individual subgroup identities to flourish is part of what's contributed to a lot of the radicalization there. So we're kind of unique this way. And the link is that we forget, when we go out and do foreign policy, we forget that how rare it is to have to be a multi-ethnic nation and yet have this strong national identity. The example I use is Libya. Libya, like the United States, is actually also a post-colonial multi-ethnic nation. But it is now basically a failed state after we deposed Gaddafi, in part because that overarching Libyan national identity was not strong enough to hold that country together. And part of that is because it was just a kind of a colonial construction. They just drew up the lines. It was too artificial to hold it together.